Before we dive into today's story, let's meet our hero, Ceres. He's your classic good guy. Honorable, determined, he has the whole package. But recently he activated a system that's, well, let's just say it's a bit weird. Basically, whenever he targets someone, he will stir up their deepest emotions. What exact kind of emotions are we talking about, you ask? Well, hang tight and let's find out. Our honorable Ceres tries his best to avoid using it. But today, it's a bit different, because he and his team are currently knee-deep in trying to beat this dungeon. Except, things aren't going smoothly at all. Everyone was running around like headless chickens, completely freaking out. Turns out, they've become bait for something way worse than they bargained for. For example, this massive demonic mommy. Demonic lady. She's standing there in the middle of the chaos, casually dropping the corpse of a human hero like it's yesterday's garbage. And she is very disappointed, as if she expected way more from these weaklings. Honestly, compared to her mighty demon king husband, these so-called human heroes are just laughable to her. Oh, and she's getting way too excited thinking about her husband. Did I mention she's his queen? Meet Yog, the demon king's top lady. Meanwhile, back with Ceres, he's got a problem of his own. A D-rank hero named Bella is lying next to him, begging him to get out of there. The monster they're up against is on a whole other level, and with Ceres being an F-rank hero, this is the worst place he could be at. However, Ceres isn't about to run away now. If he's made it this far, there's no way he's backing down at the critical moment. He turns around and tells Bella to relax, saying he got this in the bag. Meanwhile, Yog stretches lazily, clearly unimpressed with the weak humans in front of her. She's so bored she can hardly be bothered. But at that exact moment, Ceres, our noble and righteous hero, starts getting a nosebleed. Even so, he still declares he's definitely not running away. Bella, on the other hand, is freaking out even more, thinking that just standing in front of this monster is making his body give out. She's basically begging him to run while he still can. And then, just as things seem bad enough, the goblins hanging around the queen finally notice there's another human in the room. Without missing a beat, Yog led the way and charged at him, already planning to use his head as a fancy goblet for her beloved demon king. But Ceres, on the other hand, is calm as ever, because he's just activated his system and locked on to his target. As the demon queen's claw reaches for him, the system kicks into gear. Next thing you know, Yog grabs Ceres by the head. But instead of crushing him, she actually kisses him? Yep, she lifts him up and plants one right on him. The system notified, kiss complete, attack power plus 100. I know what you're thinking because Bella's face says it all. What in the world just happened? Even the goblins are frozen in place, staring at their queen as they too have no clue what's going on. Meanwhile, Ceres, ever the opportunist, breaks free, stylishly wipes his mouth and slices down the nearest goblin in one smooth move. Meanwhile, Yog is blushing and suddenly jumps back several meters. Ceres, of course, is playing it cool, not even acknowledging Bella's confused stare. Meanwhile, the queen's heart is racing. What just happened? She was supposed to kill him, but somehow it turned into a makeout session. And then, in true hero fashion, Ceres shouts dramatically, "For the safety of the people, he will sacrifice his body if he has to." The two goblins exchange glances, suddenly remembering the rumors that their queen had been sneaking around with someone on the side. They just never expected her side piece to be a human. One of the goblins suddenly snapped, shouting at them, asking, how dare they question the queen's love for the king? Only filthy humans will ever cheat. Meanwhile, Yog's heart was still racing, and her face was beet red. She couldn't believe she'd actually kissed a human. There was no way she could let Demon King ever find out about this. At the same time, her lust index had just hit 15%. Without wasting any more time, she barked out a command to her goblin lackeys to kill that human. Ceres, sword in hand, readied himself for battle. The first goblin came charging at him, swinging a massive axe that shattered his sword in a single hit. Oh great! No weapon! Now what? Ceres didn't have time to process the situation because another goblin was already rushing him. He ducked just in time, dodging the blow. His defense was still weak, but hey, at least he had that 100-point attack boost. Grabbing what was left of his broken sword, he slashed at the goblin's weapon and, surprisingly, cut it in half. But before he could celebrate, another goblin seized the moment and sprinted toward Ceres from behind. Sensing the attack, Ceres spun around and, with a powerful strike, sent the goblin flying. Bella's jaw practically hit the floor. How is an F-rank hero doing this? She wondered. It didn't make any sense. Ceres thought he'd sliced the goblin clean in half, but nope. He had only managed to scratch its skin. Just as he started to realize his limitations, a gust of wind hit him hard. He looked up and saw the Demon Queen herself coming down on him with a powerful kick. Instinctively, Ceres raised his arms to block. The impact was so strong it shattered the ground beneath him, sending rocks flying everywhere. Even Bella was knocked back by the force. The goblins? They were grinning from ear to ear, thinking the queen had finally subdued the pesky human. One goblin lifted its axe, charging straight for Ceres, only to get swatted away by the queen's tail. The other goblins stared at their queen, completely confused as they watched her sitting on top of the human. What's going on here? They all had the same question. The queen, however, wasn't having it. She ordered that no one be allowed to touch Ceres, followed up by saying anyone who disobeys dies. She then licked her lips, ready to personally teach this human a lesson. Meanwhile, her lust index was climbing dangerously close to 91%. The goblins were practically bouncing with excitement, thinking, finally, the queen's gonna finish this guy off. In the next moment, the queen grabbed Ceres by the head and opened her mouth wide. But instead of a death blow, Ceres felt something warm. Perhaps it's a bite in his ear, and followed up with some very intense slurping. The system chimed in, defense plus 50. Ceres knew all too well that this was the price of his new powers, but for someone as righteous as him, this was beyond humiliating. Yet when it came to protecting the people of the city, what was a little shame, right? Just suck it up, he told himself, but I'm pretty sure he's enjoying this. Anyway, Yog, on the other hand, couldn't believe what she was doing. She had no idea why her body was betraying her like this, and soon she was slowly kissing Ceres' neck. And just like that, the system pinged again. Agility, plus 120. By now, even the goblins were getting flustered. Wait a second, one thought. Isn't the queen supposed to kill him? But it sure didn't look like that was what was happening. Not all the goblins were clueless, though. One of the sharper ones could tell that the queen was searching for a weak point, trying to break this human down bit by bit. As Ceres' stats kept rising, he decided he'd had enough. He couldn't take it any longer. With a determined shout, he raised his broken sword, ready to strike back. But before he could swing, the queen's tail wrapped around his arm, and with one swift motion, she grabbed him by the throat and slammed him into the wall. The goblins erupted into cheers, thrilled to see the human finally put in his place. But something was definitely off with Yog now. Her body was acting weird, and it was getting harder for her to control herself. She looked down at the puny human in front of her. How dare he challenge them? Her hands slowly gripped Ceres' armor, and with one quick motion, she tore it apart like it was made of paper. Let everyone see how weak this human body is, or so she told herself. But deep down, she couldn't help but be curious to see that six-pack underneath. Meanwhile, the goblins in the back were still cheering her on, convinced she was just humiliating the human even further. Ceres, on the other hand, was shocked. She just ripped through his armor like it was nothing? And now her hand was slowly reaching out again, her eyes starting to glaze over. In her mind, she kept chanting, "I can resist, I can resist." But then a bit of drool slipped out of her mouth, as if something deep inside her was bubbling to the surface. She kept telling herself she could hold it together, but her lust index had just hit 100%. With both hands now on Ceres' cheeks, he could feel her strength, but there was no way he could break free. All he could do was watch her slowly get closer. He reached out with one hand, realizing he was still too weak to fight these monsters. Bella, watching from the side, had no idea what to think anymore. Are they still fighting?" she muttered, her face turning super red. Ceres closed his eyes, accepting his fate. If he has to sacrifice himself to save the city, so be it, he thought, bracing himself. With his hands gripping the queen's head, the system started going haywire. Agility plus 200, defense plus 300, intelligence plus 830, endurance plus 900. His stats were shooting past the 4-digit mark, faster than he could keep up with. And just as things were reaching their peak, the Demon King himself, Bartley, arrived on the scene. He stood there, frozen, taking in the sight before him. His giant sword slipped from his hand, clanging to the ground as he stared at his queen, his wife, straddling a human, with a rather questionable expression on her face. At the same time, everyone turned to look at him. Bartley blinked a few times in disbelief. What the hell is going on here?" he stammered. Just then, the system notified Ceres. Demon King Bartley received emotional damage. All stats doubled, level increased by 1. A flash of golden light fell on Ceres, but before he could make sense of it, the Demon King's furious roar filled the air. "I'm going to kill you!" Bartley bellowed, his rage shaking the ground beneath him. The very stones at his feet shattered as raw power erupted from his body. The Demon Queen glanced at him, quickly trying to explain, "It's not what you think." But Ceres, ever the determined hero, picked up his broken sword once more. He knew he wasn't strong enough yet, but that didn't mean he was backing down. With another enraged roar, the Demon King shouted, "Stay away from my queen!" and charged at him. In one swift motion, Bartley sent Ceres flying through the air like a rag doll, crashing hard into the ground. Bella looked worried, but Ceres, though shaken, slowly got up. Good news is that he was not injured. However, this guy's speed and power are off the charts, he thought, glancing up just in time to see Bartley turning back to his wife. His voice trembled as he said, "You promised there wouldn't be a next time. Why? Why did you do this again?" Ceres, on the other hand, finally noticed Bartley was an A rank. The queen didn't respond right away. She just sighed heavily. Bartley was shaking, not from anger, but from hurt. He couldn't understand why his queen had done this to him again. And while he kept bombarding her with questions, the queen finally snapped. She screamed that this was all Bartley's fault. She asked him where he was this whole time and why he was always late. Did he know that she almost had to go back to her old self because he wasn't around? The Demon King froze. So did the goblins. Everyone stared at the queen as she stood up, pointing an accusing finger at Bartley, saying if only he hadn't been late, she wouldn't have been in this mess to begin with. And now he has the nerve to come here and question her? Bartley's eyes went wide, and he opened his mouth to argue, but one look at his furious queen made him think twice. His shoulders slumped, and he quickly apologized. Saying he was sorry explained that he only went after those fleeing humans first, and swear that he will never be late. The goblins, watching this exchange, couldn't help but be in awe. "Man, the king really loves the queen," one of them whispered. "No wonder we're still single. We've got to learn from the Demon King." One of the goblins even decided he was going to confess his love to Miss Shadir tomorrow. Meanwhile, everyone seemed to have forgotten about Ceres, who, after quickly assessing the situation, realized he had no chance of beating the Demon King. Maybe he should try to sneak out. While the Demon King was busy comforting the queen, Ceres quietly helped Bella to her feet, and the two of them tried to sneak away unnoticed. The queen was still fuming at the king, saying if he wasn't late, she wouldn't have almost been seduced by a human. Their pure, loyal love was nearly tarnished. She just kept on ranting. Bartley continued to apologize, growling about that damn human and turning around ready to hunt him down. Just as he was about to act, the queen suddenly hugged him and said she was joking, as if she'd ever fall for anyone else, as he is her only love and only king. Bartley paused, slightly relieved, but then noticed the two humans making their escape. He whipped around, furious, and yelled at his goblins, "Why didn't you all stop them?" The goblins explained the queen told them not to interfere. "You brainless idiots!" Bartley roared and shot off in a blur, heading straight for Ceres and Bella. Before they could react, the Demon King appeared in front of them, eyes blazing with murderous intent. His glare was fixed on Ceres. "So this is the human who dared to seduce my beloved." In one powerful swing, Bartley sent Ceres flying again, crashing right back down, this time conveniently landing just beside Yogg. Ceres felt his ribs crack, pain shooting through his body. He couldn't even follow Bartley's movements. The Demon King was far too fast. Before Ceres could catch his breath, Bartley charged again, determined to slice him in two. "This is the price you pay for flirting with my queen," he thought. Ceres, realizing he had no other options left, activated his system one more time. It locked onto Yogg just as Bartley's massive sword came within millimeters of his face. Then, Yogg slapped Bartley right across the face. The sword skimmed Ceres' cheek and slammed into the ground beside him. Bartley was stunned. Yogg had just hit him to protect a human, and she even shouted at him to not hurt this human. Bartley stared, speechless, as Ceres scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the exit. Tears welled up in the Demon King's eyes. "Why, my queen? Why are you protecting him? You really do care about him, don't you?" he whimpered, his voice shaking. The system chimed again. Demon King Bartley received another emotional damage, level increased, all stats increased. But even with his level boost, Ceres knew he still couldn't take on Bartley. Running is still the best option here. As Ceres fled, the queen's eyes grew hazy with desire. Her thoughts were fixated on the human. She couldn't resist any longer. She needed him. Bartley, still in disbelief, blinked as he heard her mutter, "I want that human's body." What? My queen, what are you saying?" Bartley stammered, horrified. She had just promised that he was her one and only. Grabbing her arm, he tried to stop her, but she swiftly yanked it away, and without giving him a chance to react, rushed after Ceres, leaving the Demon King standing there, utterly defeated. "I can't hold back anymore. I want to let loose." With that, Yog launched herself at Ceres, pinning him to the ground. The system notifications went wild, and stats climbed like crazy. Ceres' attributes were skyrocketing, but at what cost? Meanwhile, the Demon King stood frozen in disbelief. "No!" he cried out in agony. Behind them, Bartley was desperately trying to win back his queen, even pleading, saying it's all his fault, and he will kill the human, and everything will go back to normal. But the queen shot him a furious glare. "Tell him to get lost, and don't he dare interrupt them." Bartley felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. Dropping to his knees, he let out another scream. "No!" The system chimed in again. "Demon King Bartley is in total despair. Level increased by 5. Bella, seeing Ceres in trouble, rushed over, determined to save him. But before Ceres could warn her, it was too late. The queen's tail lashed out, grabbing Bella and slamming her into the wall without a second thought, then continued her slurping. The queen couldn't understand why she was acting this way. This wasn't like her at all. But she knew for a fact, all she wants right now was Ceres. On the other side of the room, the Demon King slowly stood up, his entire body trembling. He picked up his sword, muttering over and over, "It's a lie. It's all a lie. This can't be happening. I won't accept it." He wasn't about to give up. With a roar, he charged toward them, ready to end it all. But just as he was about to strike, the queen suddenly turned to face him. His sword froze mid-swing. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He still loved her, more than anything. One look from her, and all his resolve crumbled. He dropped his sword, once again totally defeated. Oh man, poor Demon King. I kind of feel bad for him. Anyway, Yog didn't even give him a second glance. She just went right back to what she was doing. Bartley's entire world came crashing down. All the strength drained from his body as a tremendous energy started leaking from him. The system beeped. "Warning! Demon King Bartley is about to self-destruct. Level increased by 3. Yog felt the surge of power and realized what was happening. Meanwhile, the goblins began to panic. As they didn't want to get blown to bits, they scrambled in every direction. Then, with a final system notification, Ceres hit level 10. A new skill had been unlocked. In an instant, Ceres grabbed his broken sword, his body moving on pure instinct as he activated his newly unlocked skill. Instant Slash. The blade flashed through the air and sliced cleanly across the Demon King's neck. Bartley's body collapsed, and the self-destruct countdown stopped. Ceres realized that as long as he kept leveling up, he could unlock even more powerful abilities. Yog, however, looked at the fallen king in confusion. He never reacted this way the first time? Shouldn't he have gotten used to this by now? Why is he freaking out even worse? She scoffed internally, calling him a soft-hearted fool. But before she could process her thoughts, Bartley, now headless, suddenly lunged at her, grabbing her tightly. She let out a startled gasp, so shocked she released Bella. Ceres dashed forward, catching Bella just in time. Meanwhile, the Demon King's low, eerie voice echoed from his decapitated body. "Yog, keep our promise. Come with me." The system blared again. "Warning! Demon King Bartley is about to self-destruct." Yog thrashed against his grip, desperately shouting, "Let me go!" But Bartley's hold only tightened. In the next moment, another flash of sword light tore through the air. Ceres had sliced off the Demon King's arm and yanked Yog back to safety. Bartley, once again completely defeated, looked one last time at his queen. He called out her name for one last time, and then a massive explosion rocked the entire dungeon. The shockwave shattered the floor, sending Ceres, Bella, and Yog plummeting down to the lowest level. However, during their fall, something strange happened as Yog's body began to break apart. Some time passed, and Ceres struggled to sit up, and that's when he noticed a small creature lying on his chest. The small creature blinked its wide eyes at Ceres, and that's when the system finally informed him. This tiny lizard was the true form of Yog. Barely processing what was going on, Yog, in her lizard form, gave him a glance, and then darted straight into his pants. Bella, meanwhile, stirred awake, groaning as she felt discomfort all over. She had no idea where she was, nor where Ceres went. Ever the righteous hero, Ceres naturally wasn't focused on Bella's cake. Instead, his attention was on the system notification flashing before him. He'd received a map as a reward for defeating Bartley. You might be asking what about his nosebleed? Oh, that was definitely from the internal injuries he'd sustained during the battle. Yep, absolutely nothing else. Ceres hesitated for a moment. Should he open the map right now or wait? Bella, finally noticing him, scrambled to move, embarrassed. Meanwhile, Ceres made up his mind and accepted the map reward. Once activated, the map revealed every detail of the dungeon. The pathways, traps, hidden resources, and even the locations of the bosses. Perfect. Now they wouldn't get lost in this maze. Bella watched him curiously, wondering what he was staring at. But of course, only Ceres could see the system interface. After helping her to her feet, Ceres prepared to move forward. However, before they could get very far, a sharp pain suddenly ripped through his chest. He gasped and coughed up a large amount of blood, except it wasn't red. It was purple. His veins bulged, turning a deep, unnatural purple as the pain shot through his arm. Ceres cried out in agony as his pinky finger started to break down. Bella had no idea what was happening, horrified as she watched him writhe on the ground, screaming in pain. The next moment, sharp rocks nearby sliced open his skin, and from the cuts, purple liquid oozed out. Bella rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him in an effort to comfort him, unable to bear seeing him suffer like this. She could feel how feverish his body was, burning up under her touch. After a few agonizing seconds, Ceres's pinky had mostly vanished, and he was left gasping for breath. The pain had subsided, but he looked completely drained. Bella, filled with concern, asked what had happened to him and why his body was reacting like this. Ceres sighed heavily, finally confessing, saying he's been poisoned. Well, how did this happen? Let me take you back. To exactly 6 months ago, the city Ceres was in was attacked by powerful monsters. There was one hero fighting the monsters, however. He was guarding a mysterious box. But during the fight, the box was struck, unleashing an overwhelming surge of energy. Ceres had been caught in the blast, flung through the air like a rag doll, landing himself in a pit. From the box, a strange purple liquid began to spill out, which also caused the sky to turn crimson, the air thick with a choking stench, and shortly after, both the hero and the monsters began to scream in torment. The hero and the monsters, completely drenched in the strange purple liquid, quickly began to melt, their bodies disintegrating into nothing. Ceres had managed to hide under the rubble, avoiding direct contact, but the foul-smelling air had already invaded his lungs, filling his entire body with pain. When he woke up, he was in a hospital bed. The doctors delivered grim news. He had only 1 year left to live. Just as the reality of his situation began to sink in, a system window appeared in front of him. It spoke of a cure. The blood of the demon god could cleanse him of the poison. At that moment, Ceres had no idea what this mysterious window was or what it meant. But then it prompted him again. Do you wish to bind to the system and become a player? Gain access to the blood of the demon god? With no other option, and desperate to survive, Ceres decided to take a chance. He hit confirm. That's when the system told him where he could find the cure. The blood of the demon god lay deep within this very dungeon. As Ceres finished telling Bella his story, he purposely left out the part about the system. Some things were just too hard to explain. Ceres, still shaky, asked Bella to help him to the next room, saying, there should be clothes and weapons in there. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, a group of heroes cautiously entered a dimly lit room. Everyone moved carefully, but the tank leading the way wasn't careful enough. His foot pressed down on a hidden mechanism, and in the next second, he knew he was in trouble. A beam of light shot out, cutting straight through his shield and then his head. Then he crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Seeing one of their guys fall, the group froze. Their vice captain, a B-rank hero named Tyler, quickly commanded everyone to not move. Everyone stood rigid, not wanting to activate any more traps. But the death of their tank? It didn't seem to faze them much. Instead, they exchanged glances, not of grief but frustration. Great, the only tank is down. What now? They had come this far and no one wanted to turn back empty-handed. That's when their captain, Hills, stepped forward, as the only A-rank hero in the group. However, the dude was ruthless. You, he said, pointing at the weakest member of the group, a D-rank named Maxwell. The old rule of the team was clear. When in danger, send the weakest forward as bait. Maxwell's heart sank. His legs wobbled as the other members shoved him toward the front. Hills drew his sword and gave his chilling order. Go! Find the safe path, now! Maxwell didn't want to, but defying the captain's orders was a death sentence. As he was about to take a step, Tyler from the group pulled out a thing he just made, saying, "This should help, and it can bounce ahead and reveal the traps for them." However, Hills slashed the thing in half, glaring at the man, telling him if he sees any more of his useless toys, he will kill him. Tyler let out a sigh, head hanging low, and retreated back into the group. Hills barked at Maxwell again. With shaky legs, Maxwell took his first step forward. Luckily, nothing happened. He exhaled in relief. But now came the real choice, left or right. Sweat drenched him as he stared down the two tiles. His mind raced. Which was safe? Which would kill him? "Stop wasting time!" Hills yelled at him, which obviously didn't help. Maxwell lifted his foot again. "Please let this be the right one," he prayed. He stepped forward, safe again. But Hills wasn't impressed, just told him to keep going. Internally, Maxwell screamed, "I'm going to die! I can't do this anymore!" Clearly, he was at his breaking point. Suddenly, without thinking, Maxwell bolted. He turned and ran in the opposite direction, crying out that he wanted to go home. As Maxwell ran, panic completely overtaking him, he didn't notice that he was no longer retracing his steps. His foot slammed down on an untested stone tile, and in an instant, a laser shot up from the ground, piercing straight through his skull. The group froze, surprised by how fast it had happened. It seemed that the traps didn't just target the same spots. Hills glanced briefly at Maxwell's lifeless body and then turned to the rest of the group, ordering the next lowest rank to step forward. Before anyone could move, something unexpected happened. The large door ahead of them creaked open. Hills spun around, and to his surprise, it was Ceres on the other side. Hills blinked in disbelief. Ceres is part of the bait group? They should have all been dead. His mind raced. Had Ceres somehow defied his orders? He was supposed to be cannon fodder, a distraction from the dungeon's traps and monsters. How could he still be alive? The group turned to see Ceres standing at the entrance with Bella beside him, both looking surprisingly unharmed. Tyler was overjoyed at the sight of Bella, but Hills was less than impressed. His eyes settled on Ceres, questioning how this useless piece of trash was still alive. Ceres, however, looked at Hills as if looking at a fool. As memories of the day before their mission flooded back, Ceres almost laughed out loud. Hills had cornered him back then, sword in hand, practically fuming with rage. He had demanded to know how Ceres knew the color of his wife's underwear. Ceres had tried to explain himself, telling Hills that it was part of his combat training to sharpen his instincts. He tells him that he can sense everything around him. Colors, movements, objects, all of it. But Hills didn't believe a word of it, accusing Ceres of sleeping with his wife. Things had almost gotten violent. The only thing that had stopped him was his bodyguard stepping in, reminding Hills that killing someone in the city was a serious crime. Ceres, being the righteous man he was, wouldn't let anyone question his integrity. He decided it was time to demonstrate the results of his training. Without hesitation, he pointed at each person in the room and confidently revealed their underwear colors. There was a brief moment of stunned silence before the person wearing nothing suddenly changed their mind and announced, "All right, let's kill him right now." Tensions flared again, but the others quickly intervened, reminding everyone that murder in the city could lead to complications they really didn't want. That's when they hatched a better plan. Ceres would be sent to the bait group, let the dungeon take care of him. Back to the present, Ceres and Bella had just finished changing into some fresh gear in one of the dungeon rooms. They weren't expecting to bump into the expedition team here, but it seemed the group had gotten lost. Hills, standing with his usual arrogance, pointed at Ceres and ordered him to come over. Ceres looked at Hills like he was looking at a complete idiot. It didn't take long to realize Hills was gaining by using lower-ranked members to trigger traps. It was then Tyler came up with a better idea. What if they just retrace the exact path that Ceres and Bella had already taken? They could avoid the traps altogether. No need to risk more lives. But Hills wasn't having it, since he believed that they already lost too many valuable members in this C-rank dungeon. They can't afford to backtrack or waste more time. He glared at Tyler. If he doesn't like his idea, he should take the lead. Tyler again fell silent. Hills then turned back to Ceres, saying Ceres trained his intuition so well, now's the time to make himself useful and contribute to the team. Ceres, not particularly bothered by Hills' sarcasm, but still agreed. Then pulled up the map in his system. Bella, knowing the room was full of traps, immediately grew worried, telling Ceres they can find another way, no need to risk it. But Ceres just gave her a reassuring smile. It's the captain's orders after all. Don't worry, I'll be fine. Without any hesitation, Ceres took his first step forward. The rest of the team gasped in horror. Was this F-ranked guy really about to walk straight into a death trap using just his intuition? But nothing happened. Ceres took another step, and then another. By now, the entire team was staring in disbelief. This was the third step, and somehow he hadn't triggered anything yet. Wow, the guy's got incredible luck, someone muttered. Hills, however, looked furious. His face grew darker with every step Ceres took, and then, to everyone's surprise, Ceres stopped, turned around, and took another step backward. With every step, Ceres moved without hesitation. The team watched in stunned silence. Is this really just luck? Or did he somehow know the right path? It didn't make sense. Just figuring out the layout of the first half of the dungeon had cost them multiple intelligence agents. How could an F-rank possibly know the way? And then suddenly, Ceres jumped, an unexpected, bold leap forward. The group collectively held their breath, certain this was the moment his luck would run out. He wobbled a bit upon landing, almost losing his balance, but still, no traps triggered. Hills stared at him in confusion, his frustration growing. How has he not set off a single trap? Meanwhile, Ceres smirked, looking down at the map in his system. It had just given him the next step. Move 5 spaces forward. Almost there. Without a word, he casually stepped over the bodies of the 2 corpses littering the floor, making his way toward Hills. Everyone was in shock. Was this truly luck, or had his intuition been real all along? As Ceres reached Hills, he couldn't resist adding one last jab. See, Captain? That's my intuition in action. Just like I told you, I've always been able to sense things, which means I'm also clearly innocent when it comes to your wife. It was like pouring salt into Hills' already festering wound. Furious, Hills snapped. His sword was suddenly at Ceres' throat, eyes burning with rage, telling him to not give him that crap. There's no such thing as intuition. Ceres is just lucky, and luck will run out. Hills sounded super salty, but from now on, he will have Ceres lead the way.